My cousin's public rebuke of my autistic son was a mortifying experience that left an indelible mark. The incident occurred during my cousin Vanessa's wedding rehearsal, where I'd taken my son Mikey, despite his semi-low functioning autism. Historically, friends and acquaintances had often requested his absence due to his condition, which led us to decline social invitations. However, I assumed my aunt's family would be more understanding. As I informed Mikey about the wedding, he became ecstatic, jumping up and down and clapping his hands. His exuberance was contagious, and we shared a joyful moment. I prepped him on wedding etiquette, emphasizing the importance of silence during the ceremony. Nevertheless, when Vanessa reached the altar, she abruptly halted the proceedings, her voice piercing the silence. "Excuse me, what's he doing here?" she exclaimed, her tone dripping with disdain. My heart sank as I turned to Mikey, who remained oblivious to the commotion. The audience's murmurs and nods of agreement only added to the humiliation. I seethed with anger, but I chose to maintain my composure for Mikey's sake. We exited the ceremony, and Mikey soon had a meltdown, confused by Vanessa's harsh words. 2 days later, I ensured Mikey didn't attend the actual wedding, opting instead for a babysitter. During the reception, I seized the opportunity to make a speech, subtly addressing Vanessa's earlier behavior. As I raised my glass, the room fell silent, and Vanessa mouthed a thank you for not bringing Mikey. I smiled, but my intentions were far from hers. The air was thick with tension, but I stood firm, proud to be there without my wonderful son by my side. I then took my phone out and started playing a voice recording. It was one I had secretly recorded of Mikey talking about how happy he was for Vanessa and her husband in 7-year-old terms. Hearing his voice, so full of happiness, made me tear up, and the rest of the table did too, except Vanessa, who looked so angry. I thought she was about to explode. Still, she cheersed with me and the rest of the family. Little did I know that moment ended up being the calm before the storm, because the next day, not even 24 hours later, there was a knock at the door, and it wasn't Vanessa. Instead, it was CPS. They asked me a few vague questions before barging past me and examining my home. My head was spinning, and I barely understood what was going on. The woman started marking every little thing down on a clipboard. Mikey's mattress with no bed frame because of overstimulation, noted plastic on the furniture. Because of Mikey's toilet accidents, noted locks on the cupboards to protect him from sharp objects, all noted, all marked as evidence. I tried to tell her about his autism, but that's when she whispered under her breath, "That's what they all say." Before calling her higher up, I assumed this was due to an experience, since she looked like she just graduated college. When she hung up, she told me they had to do an emergency removal order, and we're going to place him in the hands of his closest relative. I immediately offered his grandma. The following 72 hours were hell. My stomach was turning, and I felt completely powerless. And above everything, I was angry. I knew somehow Vanessa was behind this. And once everything was said and done, I planned on making her pay. This wasn't just about excluding him from a wedding anymore. She was trying to take my son away permanently. As I sat in my empty house, surrounded by Mikey's toys and clothes, I started making phone calls, first to a lawyer who specialized in family court and disability rights, then to my mom, who confirmed they hadn't placed Mikey with her despite my request, then to Mikey's developmental pediatrician, who was outraged when I explained the situation. Nobody messes with my son. Nobody. Vanessa had no idea what she just started. I spent the next morning frantically gathering every document I could find related to Mikey's care, medical records, therapy assessments, school IEPs, notes from his pediatrician, anything that would prove I was a good father. My hand was shaking so bad I could barely organize the papers. I kept thinking about Mikey and where he might be. Was he getting his medications? Did they know about his sensory issues? Was someone making sure he had his special blanket at night? I called his developmental pediatrician, Dr. Chunigan, to see if she could write a letter explaining his accommodations. She was absolutely furious about the situation. I've been Mikey's doctor for 5 years. Those accommodations are medically necessary, not neglect. She sounded personally offended. I'll have a letter for you within the hour, and I'm happy to testify if needed. While waiting, I reached out to my neighbor Morgan, who works as a special education teacher. She's known Mikey since he was 4 and has helped me implement a lot of his home strategies. She immediately offered to write a character reference. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she said. "I see you with Mikey every day. You're the most devoted father I know." By noon, I had a small stack of documentation and was on my way to meet with the lawyer I'd called Elizabeth Reyes. She specialized in cases involving children with disabilities and came highly recommended by a parent support group. I belonged to her office was small, but welcoming with children's drawings on the walls. Elizabeth was all business, though taking detailed notes as I explained everything from the wedding invitation to the CPS visit. "So you believe your niece made this call as retaliation for the recording?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. "I know it sounds paranoid, but the timing is too perfect. Less than 24 hours after I embarrassed her at her wedding. CPS shows up." Elizabeth didn't look surprised. "Unfortunately, false CPS reports as revenge happen more often than you'd think. The good news is we can fight this." She explained the emergency removal would require a hearing within 72 hours. We needed to be ready to present our case, which meant more documentation and witnesses who could vouch for my parenting in the meantime. She said, "I'll file an emergency motion for visitation. They can't keep you from seeing Mikey while this is investigated." I left her office with a to-do list a mile long and headed straight to Mikey's school. The principal, Mrs. Taylor, was shocked when I told her what happened. She immediately pulled Mikey's file and promised to write a letter documenting his progress and our regular meetings. "I've seen how you are with him at every school event," she told me. "Anyone who spends 5 minutes watching you two together knows how much you care." On my way home, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was tight with anger. "I just got off the phone with your Aunt Linda. Apparently Vanessa told her Mikey had a complete meltdown at the rehearsal, and you did nothing to control him." My blood boiled. What, he was perfectly quiet until she started screaming. "I know Mom said, but she's telling everyone you're neglectful and that Mikey is dangerous and out of control." Linda mentioned Vanessa was worried you're not equipped to handle his needs. That explained the CPS call. Vanessa had painted me as an incompetent father who couldn't manage his son's disability. The realization made me sick to my stomach. When I got home, there was another surprise waiting: a Facebook message from Thomas, Vanessa's new husband. It simply read, "I had nothing to do with this. I'm sorry." I wasn't sure whether to believe him or not, but I screenshotted it anyway. It could be useful. That later my phone rang again, unknown number. I answered hesitantly. "Mr. Williams, this is Jordan from Child Protective Services. I'm Mikey's assigned case worker." My heart skipped. "Where's my son? Is he okay?" "He's currently in an emergency placement with a foster family experienced with autistic children." His voice was kinder than the woman who'd come to my house. "I understand you requested placement with your mother." "Yes," I said quickly. "She knows his routines, his medications, everything. We are looking into that option, but I wanted to let you know you've been approved for a supervised visit tomorrow at 2:00 p.m. at our office." I nearly collapsed with relief. "Thank you, I'll be there." After hanging up, I immediately called Elizabeth to update her. She was pleased about the visit, but warned me to be careful. "They'll be watching your interactions closely." She cautioned, "Be natural, but stay calm. Even if Mikey is upset, don't say anything negative about CPS or make accusations about your niece." That night was the longest of my life. I kept walking into Mikey's room, expecting to see him curled up with his dinosaur plushies, the empty bed made my chest hurt. I ended up sleeping on his floor just to feel close to him. The next day, I arrived at the CPS office an hour early, clutching Mikey's favorite comfort item, a soft blue octopus toy he called Squish. The waiting room was depressing, all faded posters and uncomfortable chairs. I watched the clock tick by agonizing minute. When they finally brought Mikey and I had to physically restrain myself from running to him, He looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes when he saw me. His whole face lit up. "Daddy." He launched himself at me, and I caught him in a tight hug over his shoulder. I could see the caseworker Jordan watching us with a neutral expression. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice thick. "I missed you so much." Mikey was talking a mile a minute, telling me about the strange house and the lady who doesn't cut sandwiches right. It broke my heart that he didn't understand why he couldn't come home with me when our hour was up. The meltdown was catastrophic. He clung to me, screaming and sobbing. I tried the calming techniques we always use, but nothing worked. The more upset he got, the more I worried. It looked bad for me. "I want to go home," he wailed as a staff member tried to gently pry him away. "I want my daddy." It took everything I had not to break down myself as I watched them carry my hysterical son down the hallway. Once he was out of sight, I sat in my car and sobbed. Back at home, I checked my email to find Dr. Chan had sent her a letter emphatically stating that all of Mikey's home accommodations were appropriate and recommended. I forwarded it to Elizabeth just as my phone rang again. It was my mom. "I just got a call from CPS. They're doing a home inspection tomorrow to see if I can take Mikey temporarily." This was progress. If they approved Mom's house, at least Mikey would be with family until we could get him home. "That's great, Mom." "Did they say anything else?" There was a pause. "Just that they received additional concerns about your care of Mikey." My stomach dropped. Additional concerns from who? They wouldn't say. "But I have a pretty good guess," she said grimly. Vanessa was doubling down. I wondered what new lie she was telling now. The thought made me angry enough to do something I probably shouldn't have. I called her directly. To my surprise, she actually answered. "What do you want?" Her voice was cold. "I want to know why you're trying to take my son away from me," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. She scoffed. "I'm not doing anything except expressing legitimate concerns about my nephew. Mikey needs professional help, not just you making excuses for his behavior. He has professional help. He has doctors and therapists, and he still can't behave properly in public." She interrupted. "The way you let him act at my rehearsal proves you can't handle him." I was so stunned I could barely speak. He was completely quiet until you started screaming at him. "That's not how I remember it," she said smugly, "and neither do most of the guests." That's when it hit me. She was getting other people to make statements against me. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. I immediately called Elizabeth to tell her about the conversation. She advised me not to contact Vanessa again and to document everything that had happened so far. I spent the rest of the evening writing a detailed timeline from the wedding invitation to the CPS visit. The hearing was scheduled for the next day. Elizabeth met me outside the courthouse looking confident. In a crisp suit, "We have strong documentation," she reassured me, "and Dr. Chan will be testifying by phone." As we walked in, I saw Vanessa sitting in the hallway with an older woman I didn't recognize. She smirked when she saw me. The hearing room was small and less formal than I expected. The judge, an older man named Judge Williams, reviewed the initial CPS report, while Elizabeth presented our documentation, the letters from Dr. Chun, Mrs. Taylor, and Morgan, along with all of Mikey's medical records. "Your Honor," Elizabeth said, "the accommodations CPS flagged as concerning are all medically recommended for a child with Mikey's specific needs. They're not signs of neglect, but of attentive parenting." The CPS worker who'd inspected my house testified, next describing what she'd found. When questioned by Elizabeth about her experience with autistic children, she admitted she had limited training. "And did you consult with any autism specialists before determining these accommodations were inappropriate?" Elizabeth asked. "Well, no, but thank you." Elizabeth cut her off smoothly. Dr. Chen's testimony was powerful. She explained each accommodation in detail and why it was necessary for Mikey. She also emphasized how well Mikey was doing under my care. "I have patients whose parents refuse to implement these strategies," she said firmly. "Mr. Williams has gone above and beyond to create an appropriate environment for his son. I thought we were making progress until the CPS attorney called his next witness. Vanessa." She walked to the front looking solemn. but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. She described the rehearsal incident completely differently, claiming Mikey had been disruptive and uncontrolled. She also said she'd seen me manhandle him when he got upset. I've been concerned about my uncle's ability to parent for years. She said with fake sincerity, I only called CPS because I genuinely fear for Mikey's well-being. Elizabeth's cross-examination was brutal. Miss Johnson, isn't it true that you called CPS less than 24 hours after Mr. Williams played a recording of his son at your wedding reception? Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. The timing is coincidental. And isn't it true that you explicitly didn't want Mikey at your wedding of his autism? That's not yes or no. Please, Vanessa glared. I wanted an adult-only wedding. Elizabeth smiled slightly. Yet several children were present. Correct, your flower girl ring bearer and at least 3 other guests. Children. Vanessa's face flushed. Those children know how to behave. So it wasn't an adult-only wedding. You specifically didn't want one child, Mikey, because of his disability. The judge was watching Vanessa carefully. Now, Elizabeth continued her questioning, establishing that Vanessa had rarely interacted with Mikey before the wedding and had no expertise in autism or child development. One final question, Elizabeth said. Did you tell your guests that Mr. Williams shouldn't bring Mikey to the rehearsal? Vanessa hesitated. I might have mentioned it to a few people. So you deliberately excluded a child based on his disability, then called child services when his father brought attention to this discrimination objection. The CPS attorney called argumentative. Sustained, said the judge, but he was frowning at Vanessa. When it was time for closing statements, Elizabeth emphasized that while Mikey's care might look unusual to someone unfamiliar with autism, everything in my home was designed for his well-being. The only evidence against my client is the testimony of a woman who has demonstrated clear bias against his son and who made this report immediately after being embarrassed at her wedding. The judge took a short recess to review everything. Those 20 minutes felt like years. I kept replaying Vanessa's testimony in my head, furious at how she twisted everything. When Judge Williams returned, he looked directly at me. Mr. Williams, I'm dismissing the emergency removal order based on the evidence presented. I see no indication of neglect or harm. In fact, quite the opposite. The relief was so intense, I nearly fell out of my chair. However, he continued, I am ordering a follow-up home visit with a specialist in developmental disabilities to ensure all accommodations are appropriate. Until then, your son will be placed with his grandmother with unlimited visitation for you. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was close. Mikey would be with family, and I could see him whenever I wanted. As we left the courtroom, Vanessa pushed past me, face twisted with anger. This isn't over, she hissed. Elizabeth put a hand on my shoulder. Actually, I think it is, she said loudly enough for Vanessa to hear. And if you make any more false reports, my client will pursue legal action for harassment. I was allowed to pick Mikey up from the foster home that afternoon. The foster mom seemed nice, but admitted he'd been struggling. He's barely slept. She told me gently, he keeps asking for his daddy in his room. When Mikey saw me, he was cautious at first, like he was afraid I'd disappear again. But when I told her we were going to Grandma's house, his whole body relaxed. And you'll be there too? He asked anxiously. Every day, buddy, I promise. On the drive to my mom's, Mikey fell asleep, clutching Squish. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, still not quite believing I had him back at Mom's house. We set up his temporary room together, trying to make it as familiar as possible. After a family gathering, tensions escalated between me and my cousin Vanessa, who had previously humiliated my autistic son Mikey. Vanessa's behavior sparked a chain reaction, with family members speaking out against her actions. Thomas, Vanessa's husband, eventually stood up to her, revealing he'd been helping me behind the scenes. The family rallied around us, and Vanessa's attempts to isolate us backfired. With the help of CPS worker Jordan and lawyer Elizabeth, we were able to put an end to Vanessa's harassment. Mikey was finally able to come home, and we began to rebuild our lives. Vanessa's husband Thomas left her after discovering her actions, and the family dynamic shifted in our favor. In the end, we found peace and a sense of belonging, and Mikey was truly included in the family.